There's no way, even after Trump, America aid to the world and especially to Africa will never be the same. Because there are some realities that will sink in, because they have their own challenges. The populations are growing, they are facing many more problems. Of course, they may probably want to come back and then restore it, but it's not going to be restored like before. So, and I think it is that pressure that will remain on that will actually be the driver behind the momentum of Africa. So it's no longer like we're going to be a situation whereby, we had COVID and then we come back and then the USAID comes back and we will continue. You're not going to see those things anymore. We're going to be dealing with that reality where those funding is not, that money is not going to be there anymore. If you wanted to explore the American genome or the Caucasian genome, it's almost overexploited. Here we bring in something new. We also want to actually not throw out the data out there, but actually use the data to actually create a lot of new things. And we have been translational intentionally right from the beginning. That for me is very exciting. I think it is for Africa, for instance, to organize themselves to actually just to improve their bargaining power. If they could come together as a continent, 54 countries, and say, okay, this is how many malaria drugs and test diagnostic kits they want to buy for our people. They have a very strong bargaining power there. They can actually drive down the cost even way more than what the USAID and the UNICEF and other things were doing. I think it's an opportunity for this continent actually to take ownership of its own problem and address those problems in a way that was not done before. I don't see this definitely as all negative. I think I see it also as an opportunity in disguise for the continent to start really gaining its own real independence and freedom.
I think a place I'd like us to start from is the most recent Times Award. And let's talk about that. I think this is the second or third time. Is it the second or third time for you?
No, I had two awards this year. One was 100 most influential people in the world, and the second one was 100 most influential people in the world in health.
Wow. That's major. That's major. So how does that feel? It's not every time we see science being celebrated as it is at the moment. I think for me, the change seems to come after COVID. We seem to have seen the importance of the science ecosystem. So I don't know, from somebody that has been a scientist for this or for years, decades, and now getting those kinds of recognitions, how do you describe the trend at the moment?
Yeah, but I think it's because the work that we're doing is resonating. So I think we are innovating in a space where there's competition. So if you are competitive enough and then your work is resonating, I think that's where people really start recognizing what you do and then you're consistent in what we're doing. So I think that consistency is not like we innovated during COVID and then that was the end of it, or we innovated during Ebola. Actually, we started innovation during Ebola and then that remained consistent. So I think that for me, I think that's what people are getting to see. So it's no longer the way it used to be before. So where people used to come to Africa and then do the work, but now they are seeing the innovation come from within Africa by Africans. So I think that is resonating a lot with people, and then there is consistency in what we're doing.
Why do you think consistency matters, especially in the African continent?
Consistency matters because if you have one random finding and then after that there's nothing else, then it's obvious that it was random. It is the game of luck. But if you are constantly creating and recreating, innovating, then it's no longer like a random finding, but it's clear that you definitely know what you're doing. You definitely have the mind to create and to innovate. So it's not like it is a random accident. So I think that is something that we have to, on the continent, we need to be good at and leverage, what we have. And then I keep saying what we have is what we have: the pathogens, we have the people, we have the diversity. We have the biodiversity is around us. For me, as far as I'm concerned, they are not challenges, but they are wealth in disguise. And we need to tap on what we have. So I think we need to transform what we have. So I think it's clear from what we're doing that the big ecosystem should learn from what we're doing in science. For instance, up to now in Africa, what is happening in the area, like in the area of mineral extraction, is the fact that the minerals are extracted and then they're exported raw. They are not transformed. But this used to be the same scenario in the field of science, where samples, where you call that is equivalent to mineral, were being sent out raw without research. But now, with what we do is that there's transformation on the ground. So we're not longer exporting sample, but we're exporting sample that have been transformed into data, right? And then as we're exporting those samples that are transferred into data, we are basically creating new knowledge and then we're innovating. And the reason here why we see that visibility is that we've gone from a situation where we're consumer of knowledge to a point where we're producer of knowledge. So now people are consuming the knowledge that we're producing. It's now a two-way traffic, right? It used to be a one-way traffic where we're basically just consuming knowledge, but this time, while we're consuming knowledge for others, we're also producing knowledge that other people are consuming. So it becomes a more of what I call an equitable kind of conversation, equitable kind of partnership, equitable kind of collaboration that we're engaging with people. It becomes a situation where people know that while we don't have to go to this place just to tell them what to do, we are going to a place where they know what to do and then they can tell us what to do in that place. So that gives you some level of credibility and respect. And I think that's what we're seeing.
In the bigger scheme of things right now, what is your current vision and how does it align with current trend? Or are you more particular about, are you now future thinking, or do you still think the current approach that you are thinking about is still relevant in the present day?
But we've always been future thinking. If we weren't future thinking in SGIT, we wouldn't be where we are now. So we started thinking about doing genomic sequencing where nobody thought about it. Now we are more in the realm of translational genomics, and we've demonstrated that we can do that. At least after doing genomics, went translational. Remember that we were the group that produced the very first rapid diagnostic test that for Ebola, for emergency use authorization that was approved by the WHO and then the US FDA. Because in real fact, when you look at it, we were the first group in the world to show that translational genomics can result into solution that can help contain an epidemic quickly. It is an approach, that mindset and that thinking process that helped the world to actually understand that during 2020 COVID, the COVID-19 pandemic, that they could actually go from, for RNA viral sequences to create to create vaccines, because there were already a proof of concept in 2014 that you could go from genomic sequencing to creating diagnostics, because that is our strength. So we basically are way more than that now. So we are looking beyond just doing mere sequencing. We are looking beyond creating the next generation diagnostics, leveraging novel technologies like gene editing technology. Remember that we also have created a CRISPR-based diagnosis that, the first CRISPR diagnosis for an infectious disease was created in our lab for Lassa fever. And now there are many other CRISPR, for instance. We created one for SARS-CoV-2. So we basically just thinking now, we're very futuristic in the way we're looking at it. Are we going to be creating diagnostics? Our goal is actually to be able to create a diagnostic within 7 days if there is a disease X emerge and we have the ability to detect that. But then we are also thinking about how do we become more nimble? How do we make the diagnostic cheaper? How do we multiplex all the diagnostics? How do we create a platform where we don't, instead of doing multiple diagnosis for suspected disease, can we have one single platform that can scan a sample and enable you to detect what could be potentially what is in there? Can we use the platform that we have to accelerate not only diagnostic development, but drug development? Can we accelerate vaccine development? Yes. So, and are we just going to stop at looking at infectious disease? No. If you notice toward the end of last year, we actually sequenced the first genomes or African genomes on the NovaSeq X Plus. So it's to tell you that we've gone beyond just looking at infectious disease. We're also looking at using the human genome sequencing in Africa to address the issue of non-communicable disease. So, and you cannot talk about non-communicable disease in the context of Africa without understanding the interplay that is existing between pathogens and genetic diversity in human. Pathogens and what drives diversity in human. So these are some of the things that you can forget, for instance. And then we are very mindful of the fact that some of the genetic diversity we see in African populations are driven by pathogens. So that foreknowledge that we have will make us actually look at the African genomes in a completely different way compared to other people. So we basically just really innovating, creating, and being at the forefront of what the next generation technological innovation will be for, I mean, not only for the African human genome, but actually leveraging those knowledge actually to take Africa to the fore, and push the frontiers of genomics in order to give the continent, the rightful place that it deserves.
I'm looking at it from a bigger conversation around the perception of the continent as one of the late adopters of technology. And it seems like before, everybody would always believe that some of these advanced technology systems would not be able to work on the African continent. But for your laboratory, your team, and a few other examples elsewhere on the African continent, we seem to now be in the position to say that these systems can naturally work on the African continent. What are your thoughts on this reality? And when you talk about these approaches, what you do in your laboratory to your international partners, how has the conversation changed regarding the perception of the continent as a late adopter of technology?
I think that perception can no longer stand because we have demonstrated, a few years ago when genomic sequencing was still in its infancy, we were able to adopt and absorb that technology in Africa and use it to do the things the way that nobody expected. And I remember that for COVID, for instance, we sequenced the first COVID in Africa as we got the sample in 48 hours. That is a speed that nobody, even in the global north, has gotten. So it means that we have the ability to absorb the technology. And if you could look at, for instance, genomic sequencing, I mean, it's everywhere in Africa. So that's again to demonstrate that, it's not absorption of technology that is a problem. I think, by all indication, it is obvious that given the resources and the opportunities, Africans are very good in absorbing technologies, and Africans are very good at innovating with new technologies. Think about it. We're all talking about, using genomics, doing genomic surveillance. Look, the most terrible variants of of SARS-CoV-2 during the COVID-19 pandemic, be it the beta variant or the Omicron, were all discovered in Africa. That's the truth. So if we were not able to absorb the technology and then to innovate, there's no way we would have done that. And remember, we did it and we shared with the world. So again, apart from the fact that the innovation comes not only on the fact that we can make discovery, but we are also not selfish. We understand public health much more than any other person by sharing data for global public good. So I don't get worried about that. That cannot stand anymore because we've demonstrated more than once that absorption of technology is not a problem. I think the question that should be asked is, if given the opportunity and the resources, is it that African cannot rise to the occasion? The answer is absolutely yes. Give the opportunity and the resources, I can tell you that Africans can perform way beyond the expectation of what people are thinking. I think it's a very old narrative to think that, Africans are laid back, they cannot do this. What is it that, we cannot create and innovate in the environment where we are? And then I keep saying the freshest one is really this COVID-19 pandemic, and then see the innovations on the continent. But have we been given the resources? Have we been given the opportunities? Most of the time you don't have both combined. That's what we need. And then you could see the innovation. Over.
One of the issues that I think you mentioned in your response is empowerment of African continent, and I think there is a big issue at the moment now, which is access to one of the world's biggest grant providers. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the US and I was visiting some institutions. When I got to Massachusetts, UMass Chan, I was there and
Yes.
I was in some conversations with the chancellor and some other scientists in the institution, and they highlighted how delicate the situation is right now with the situation with the NIH grant restrictions and how this threaten research on the not just locally but internationally. I'm
Mhm.
curious to know how exposed is your team's research and how are you navigating these sudden constrictions in accessibility to international research funding?
I would say my team is exposed. We had NIH grant that were actually cut. It's not a problem. But it also the fact that we have diversified our own sources of funding. And I don't see the situation at NIH as a very alarming situation in the sense that I don't think that is all lost for the African continent. But I think rather, for me, it's an opportunity for the African continent to realize how vulnerable it is. It is an opportunity for the leadership in Africa to realize how vulnerable we are as a people. And I believe that, this should be a wake-up call for the leadership on the continent for them to start seeing the value in funding research in Africa so that they can take up their mantra and really start doing it. We've seen countries in Africa who were not budgeting for antiretroviral drugs before. Nigeria, e.g., Nigeria, providing the resources within a short time to buy antiretroviral, which means that it is actually always a matter of priority. We've seen countries in Africa that were not providing for malaria drugs and diagnostics before, making resources available to buy, malaria drugs. I mean, malaria drug research. I think it is for Africa, for instance, to organize themselves to actually just to improve their bargaining power. If they could come together as a continent, 54 countries, and say, okay, this is how many malaria drugs and test diagnostic kits they want to buy for our people. They have a very strong bargaining power there. They can actually drive down the cost even way more than what the USAID and the UNICEF and other things were doing. I think it's an opportunity for this continent actually to take ownership of its own problem and address those problems in a way that was not done before. I don't see this definitely as all negative. I think I see it also as an opportunity in disguise for the continent to start really gaining its own real independence and freedom.
So I'm curious to know how much was affected in your own grants and which research project was that for?
Well, of course, I did have NIH projects. We had project with, the ISMA, but fortunately, just the other day we got a note of. I counted it off before, but I think that is coming back gradually. I got a notice of award. It was the International Center of Excellence for Malaria Research. We're on our second year, so but then we just got a notice of award, so which means that project is going on, but we don't know whether it's going to go on for the third year. So we also had another one for the DSI Africa, for instance, but then I think we probably believe that will go forward because as we started hearing from the program officers. So again, to just say that, well, for us, maybe, directly because we're probably direct recipient, right? Not sub awardees, because there are two problems here. When you're a direct recipient, it's different from when you're a sub under an American institution. So I think that's probably the silver lining for us where we are primary recipient than to be a sub. So, but clearly is the fact that, I think that diversity that we will find. I mean, I think in our situation, because we're a bit diverse, but some other lab get seriously hit. But at the same time, I don't think it's all lost. At the same time, I also think that it's also an opportunity for African investigators to understand that they have to diversify their research portfolio, through different funders and then through different organizations. So I think it's really a good lesson for many of us. And I do think that as time goes on, then these international collaborations are going to be a little bit more equitable because if we ever get back, then we need to start thinking on how to make it in a way that we can all make our own contribution so that it's no longer like something that is one way. I think the US has really done a tremendous job over the past supporting all these programs. I do believe that, frankly, they are right to feel the way they are feeling, and it's normal, that countries actually take up and own up and take responsibility to do some of the things. If somebody keep giving you something every day, every day, every day, you will never know the cost and then how difficult it is. But if somebody give you something and at some point they give you something for years and at some point you say, you know what, you were giving me 100% last year. I think my guess is that, you know what, I will probably suggest that instead of giving 100% next year, give me 90% because I want to chip in 10. If you were doing that, and then at some point we are tipping like 40, 50%, I wouldn't have seen the situation where the US government would have gone this way. They also have their own problem. They have their problem in their backyard. So why should why should we on earth expect that they have to, support us to address our problems locally? I think collaboration requires that people chip in something. But a situation where it is skewed and we see people, on one side giving almost 100%, I don't think it's fair. I think we need to try. We also need to do our best. What I'm saying is, we probably may not have as much as they can, but if they see that effort, anybody see you making an effort toward him to address a problem is encouraged.
When people do grant applications, the default setting is everybody expect that once they get an NIH grant, that seems to be the apex of all research grant structure, and they seem confident and comfortable with their research. With your experience now, what will be your advice for any African scientist that has a project that is heavily reliant on this approach? How do you think they can best navigate the current funding landscape?
That, if you have a grant and then the grant, has been withdrawn, so why can't they take the same grant, look for other agencies outside America, for instance, or even within the continent, sell the same idea? One advantage of selling the same idea is the fact that this was actually even funded by NIH, showing that, NIH is very competitive. It means that it was a great idea. That definitely gives you, so, already a basis for which you can start pitching this. I had it at NIH. Everybody knows that it's tough to get NIH grant. So, but then people, even the potential funders, knowing that this was funded by NIH before we run into this problem, will understand that it's a great idea. But then we also, as I said before, there's a need for us to not to look into one single box, but to diversify, to look for other agencies, that may share, this same type of interest in the kind of project that we're doing, and pitch these ideas to them. I think, diversifying our portfolio is not a bad idea. And that's what I would tell an African scientist: diversify your portfolio.
The key message is diversifying portfolio. And I think it's so relevant to an issue that I'm really concerned about, which is getting not just the best, but the most out of data that researchers in your team are now generating with some of the high-end equipment and technologies that you now have at your disposal. Beyond just saying, providing the overview of what the situation is genetically, there are so many potential applications of genomics in translating into products that would actually serve diagnostic and interventional purposes. And I know that is a subject that you are intentionally passionate about. So what is the current state of translating research insights into unique tools that would help everyday patients? So where are you currently at that? I know
we definitely are investing in the translational space. So, for instance, we're looking beyond genomic sequencing. As I told you, we are really looking into areas like proteomic, transcriptomics, and then doing things like single cell to understand what is happening into patients with potential to identify targets and all of that. But we're also looking in country. As if you look at the ecosystem in Nigeria, it's changing. The present government has set up. I think is a whole office for value chain for medical for medicine and then value chain, and it's called the PVAC, for instance, right? So, and that office has a mandate to work with academic institutions, the private sector, for instance, to actually see how you could translate science into development of novel technologies, vaccines, and everything. So those are things, initiatives on the African continent that not only this is the case for Nigeria, for instance, and we're working with them. Now, if you look at other countries in Africa, they look at, of course, look at Senegal, look at Rwanda, look at Ghana, and then South Africa. They are putting up, working, of course, with the partnership with all those vaccine manufacturers to set up a list of vaccine manufacturers. That for me is going to be very catalytic, for instance, to encourage translational genomics in that area. But there are also new initiatives on the continent that are trying to build ecosystem, because what we need on the continent, first of all, is to build an ecosystem that makes people understand the value of doing translational science. And that building that ecosystem requires to bring to the table government, the private sector, academia, and then actually even the consumers. But then we have this new initiative, I told you about it before, the Genomic Centers of Excellence in Africa, that is trying to build that ecosystem. And we're trying to understand, we've done a landscape analysis. We understand that, you need to have to the table academic and research institution that will drive the knowledge, new knowledge and innovation. You need to have government that can set some priorities. You need to have the private sector, and then regional health organization, for instance, like Africa CDC and others. Then the private sector now understand that, through research innovation, then they can make money, by basically just in producing tools and everything. And then I think bringing people together and then eventually building some use cases will be very important. Because without use cases, people will be scared to put their money. But once you have one or two use cases that are showing, that is working, and then along the use cases, basically just think about having people putting up startups, putting up incubators. Just one single use case where you can have a startup that goes from the lab and then create a product that will unleash actually that value chain completely. Think about it before in Africa, look in the sector of finance, where all of these things, the solution were all coming from the global north. But once young Africans put themselves and then found solution for fintech, then you could see them actually taking over. Everything is happening here now. So there's a lot of young startups that I see in Lagos and everything. They are doing a lot of AI, machine learning, big data analysis. You just need to have a few of them that will basically just have like a proof of principle, right? That will take research data and then create a product. Once you see that the floodgate is going to be open, the ecosystem in which we are. People are so scared, but once they see, one use case, then it becomes a situation where everybody wants it. It's the same thing that we had in sequencing. 2014, we're the only place in Africa that has a sequencer. When people saw the power behind it, right, that was a use case. Suddenly, everybody actually started doing it. Everybody has one now. So I'm not concerned about that. I'm actually very confident that the future is on this continent.
That is absolutely positively encouraging. Being proactive now, I think some of the people I've interviewed regarding how the continent should take these developments from the US government's decision to reduce funding is quite proactive, looking at Africa actually coming to terms with the fact that we have to be spending more on our health system. So, how can we leverage on this current momentum so that it doesn't get eased off like we did with the passion that we had during the COVID pandemic? And we seem to have forgotten it. Now, Trump is bringing that passion back again to be intentional about prioritizing our health system. So, from your experience around these various phases around Africa's health sector and research sector conversations, how do you think we can leverage this momentum and get the best out of it for the continent?
I think for me, the way I see it is that, the trend is gone. There's no way, even after Trump, America aid to the world and especially to Africa will never be the same. Because there are some realities that will sink in, because they have their own challenges. The populations are growing, they are facing many more problems. Of course, they may probably want to come back and then restore it, but it's not going to be restored like before. So, and I think it is that pressure that will remain on that will actually be, the driver behind the momentum of Africa. So it's no longer like we're going to be a situation whereby, we had COVID and then we'll come back and then the USAID comes back and it will continue. You're not going to see those things anymore. We're going to be dealing with that reality where those funding is not, that money is not going to be there anymore. We have to learn to actually start putting money where our mouth is, and then also understanding the value that in order for us to buy cheap or to get cheap, we need to invest in the research for the long term, produce locally, and then eventually, through that process, we are not only going to get cheap, but we're also going to create employment for the youth. I think that for me is a huge window of opportunity because they say necessity is a mode of invention. So I believe that now that we're in a situation where we need more than yesterday, we will have no other things but to actually rethink. At the political level, at the academic level, at the private sector level, and at the citizen level.
What new research from IGH in recent times are you most excited about, and what is in the pipeline that you can share with me at the moment?
Now, we have quite a number of things. One of the major things that I will tell you is the fact that we embark on human genome research. Basically, is working to sequence a lot of different codes on the continent. You're talking about metabolic diseases, cardiovascular diseases, kidney diseases, and many others. So there is a huge window of opportunity there to translate that into things, and then by the way, there's not much data from the African genome out there. So if you wanted to explore the American genome or the Caucasian genome, it's almost overexploited. Here we bring in something new. We also want to actually not throw out the data out there, but actually use the data to actually create a lot of new things. And we have been translational intentionally right from the beginning. That for me is very exciting. Learning, bringing the experience that we have from infectious disease into non-communicable disease. So we are not coming into it very naively. We are not coming into it inexperienced. We're coming into it with a lot of experience. We're coming into it with the knowledge of how to partner, how to collaborate, equity. Those are some of the things that we're putting forward in terms of, as drivers for this collaboration. And that for me, I'm very excited on the fact that now we're dealing with other problems from what we used to deal with before. And then there's also the fact that we're basically dealing with issues that have not been that explored in the past. And then there is a huge window of not only creating, innovating, but also leveraging those kind of innovations in order to build a local capacity in this space.
Is it possible in the short term or long term to see IGH fully supported and funded by sources within the African continent? Is it a realistic goal?
There is huge potential there, right? I would say there's huge potential there because I can tell you that for now we have some African private philanthropy supporting us. So these are not things that you used to see before. So there is movement. It's slow, but it is moving. And when I talk about private philanthropies, African private philanthropies, they are supporting us in millions, of dollars. So it's not necessarily what you think it used to be before. And then also, we basically are also in our own way developing ways of sustaining ourselves. For instance, you would think about doing research within where we are. One of the major costs of driver cost of research, for instance, in our own context, is often the source of power, the source of electricity, and everything. What we've done at IGH is to innovate in that space. Let me tell you, and let me shock you, we're generating 1.4 megawatt, power from solar energy. So that free us. So that is the first freedom. Free us from power. We have a water treatment plant that free us from having it. So I just want to give you like some example where we're thinking about sustainability, like liquid nitrogen. We built a liquid nitrogen plant. So not only we're producing liquid nitrogen for ourselves, but we're thinking about how to sell that liquid nitrogen. So we're really thinking actively about sustainability. So which means that we can actually scope funding and resources within the continent in order to actually support some of the activities that we're doing.
Wow, that's that's a lot. Do you think is it not over cumbersome to have to do things in the lab, everything, and still be providing building primary infrastructures yourself? Is that not too much?
Well, of course, it is too much for the beginning, but I mean, we all have to start from somewhere, and you need to build up a model. It might take a lot out of me to build a model, but once we have the model set, other people who don't have to go through what I went through. For instance, I got people from Kenya coming next week from the Aga Khan, hospital. I have people from Rwanda. I mean, it's a powerful delegation that involving the ministers of health in Rwanda coming to see what we have. So, which means that we've done the groundwork. We've done all of the work that other people would have done. It's taken us this number of years to do it. You can imagine coming and then somebody give you the floor plan and everything ready. You go and replicate it. And then you have a model right in front of you that has been done. You don't need to think about power. You don't need to start thinking. You have everything laid out for you. So I think for me, the work that we've done so far, yes, it's taken a toll on me. I mean, I'm sure I cut my hair now, a lot more gray than you ever imagined. So if you saw me like 2 days ago, you'll be wondering. But it is a price to pay to turn things around.
What are you currently optimistic about?
I think optimistic. I will say that things are changing in Africa. It is slow, but I think that the current situation for me is giving an opportunity to this continent to realize over reliance on the outside, and then that can basically create a situation whereby people will now understand that it is important to work together because you see it's clear down that Africans can realize that it's together that they're going to be stronger. I'm seeing that, you're on the social media, you're everywhere. It is a language that people are speaking about now. My optimism is the fact that at least the current situation will push Africans to come together and actually work together and actually address their issues together.
What still worries you? What are you still most concerned about the most? Or what keeps you awake most nights at the moment?
I mean, I think is having another epidemic that will come and then do like COVID because we are yet to recover fully from COVID. And if we have something like that coming on, it's not going to be too good, not only for the continent, but for I mean, I would say for the world because we need to recover. And then, before we can face another big challenge. If you face a big challenge, it's going to affect the whole world very negatively. So I think what keeps me awake at night is actually to hear that we're having another epidemic or another pandemic. Actually, one of those emerging or emerging diseases actually spreading across the world or having one weird, pathogen that is actually spreading. That keeps me awake because I believe that if we are faced with that kind of challenge in this period of recovery, that is going to be really, really, really damaging for the global economy and then for global health.
From the experience of COVID, what do you think IGH would potentially do differently if we potentially have another similar global epidemic?
From my experience from COVID, I think it's not just IGH. The ecosystem, the research ecosystem in Nigeria has to change. So, which means that we have to actually work as a network than to be having individual laboratory that they are bringing together. When there is a crisis. So that's really my experience. That if we had a network, we would have been more efficient. Would have been more efficient, and then things would have done way more better. But we didn't have a network established. We brought individual labs together, and then suddenly people started competing among themselves or trying to compete among themselves. But if you had a network with a structure that was well set, everybody knowing clearly, who does what and know the capacity and the capability of each one of us, they would have actually known exactly what to do, how to do things, and how to coordinate our actions. I think it's coordination that definitely, I think an IGH can actually help a lot in helping coordinate those things, especially in the genomic area.
Prof, as we are talking, I keep having more additional questions. We can't finish this conversation in the days. I always enjoy having these size conversations with you, and I really, really appreciate you talking to me this time. And don't worry, I will always be in your inbox again. Say, Prof, I have something to talk about. Hopefully,
Always.
we'll have time to talk. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the time 100 again.